language.
Hello and welcome back to the Way to Native Chronicles. I'm going to do a little bit of a different video today. It's you can't go hunting and shooting all the time. There's sometimes other things that are on the agenda, things to support your activities. And one of the new things that's come up recently is we've acquired a trap line that we have to develop, and this is a trap line that hasn't been trapped for a good 20 years, maybe more. So there's no cabin built on it. We're going to have to start this all from scratch. There's no roads within 2 to 6 kilometers of it, and you have to get in right now through cut lines and whatever means you can, by boat, by the river. So one of the things we're going to need a good machete. Now, I've never really had much use for a machete before, but now that we're going to be going into this trap line and developing it, we're going to clear some trails through the bush. A lot of the cut lines that are there, they're nice, but they're often very old. So when you start walking through them, there's willows growing all the way through, and it can be very thick. So normally, if you're just going through one time, you just push your way through. But if you're going to go through a certain path a lot of times, then it's very well worth your time to take a machete and hack off the limbs as you go through. Next time you come through that way, you have a much clearer path to go. So what I've got is this machete with this. It's an SOG machete. It's actually pretty good in many respects. It has a saw on the top, a bit of a pounder, grinder on the bottom of the handle. Nice length blade, 18-inch, so it can get some good leverage on it. But the sheath that comes with it is really something to be desired. They call it ballistic nylon, or whatever they want to call this stuff. But in truth, this is kind of piddly stuff, right? I look at that. There's your belt loop there, a little piece of nylon. That's going to fall off your belt pretty easy. This is pretty utilitarian in having a Velcro closer. It does close up on the machete pretty decently, but when you're going to use a machete, you don't want to have that thing dangling around on your belt as you're trying to work through the bush. Actually on the trap line, I'll be carrying a handgun also on the strong side. So, I'm not going to have much room on my belt there anyways. But even in spite of that, getting it out of a sheath from your side and stuff, it's just not going to work very well, aside from the fact that it's not a very strong construction to begin with. So what I want to do is build a leather sheath for this. And that's what this video is going to be about. Oh, I finally got to the point of what this video is about. Sorry. So, I've done quite a bit of leather work in the past, and I've produced some videos on that. I think I'll maybe use a few pieces from those videos to augment this, to show some of the leather working techniques, because honestly, I've had a lot of people ask me, they see a holster I've made or some sort of thing like that, and say, man, can you make one for me? And I've always say, no, there's no way I'm going to make one for you. Like, first of all, it's for fun for me. I enjoy doing it. Second of all, I won't enjoy doing it if it's for money. So, and third of all, it's easy to do. It's really, people, if you haven't done leather work, you should get into it, because it's very accessible. The tools that you need are not very much, and once you learn a few little basic skills, you're going to be away to the races and making stuff for yourself for the rest of your life. So whatever you need, when you know how to work with leather, you can make it. And that's exactly what the situation is here. So here I got the kind of a so-so sheath, what I'm going to do, and I've thought about this for a little bit, I'm going to mount it, so I'm going to create a shoulder strap that goes here and then around down, across my back like a bandolier. Put a couple of hoops on this thing and have it so that when I walk along I can just draw that sheath out, the machete out very quickly, do some work with it, and then push it back in. Now, even as I go through this, you've got go through the motions. You have to think through stuff like this a lot. So I can see when I'm putting it back in, maybe I have to have a little bit of slack on the bandolier, or maybe you have it be able to tilt a little bit, maybe hanging more from the top, so that I can, when I put it back in, I can put it in like this, because it's a long blade. So I'm going to have to maybe tilt it up like that and get it in. So when you do leather work, it's a good idea to spend a lot of time just thinking about it, what you're going to do. For instance, you take just something like the bandolier belt here. You're going to just put this over your shoulder like this and just sew it up like that. Not such a good idea. I mean, you can do that, but actually you're better just crossing it, right? Think about these types of things when you're working with leather. That's going to make a better fit. I also have to keep in mind that I may be carrying a backpack when I'm going in with the machete as we're going into the trap line. So, you know, got to think about maybe taking it on and taking it off and putting it on while I have the backpack on, perhaps. So what I'm going to do is I bought some of these parts already. I got a buckle. Went to the leather store, got a few things. I don't need much stuff to make your own leather goods, but you do have to buy a few things. So I've got myself a buckle here. And I should put that buckle so that the brake on it is up here, and that way the flap, the tie through comes through, and then the rest of the belt hangs down. You don't want it hanging up. All little things like that. Thinking everything through for your leather project. I could go on and on, really. Like when I make this sheath, maybe, here, I'll take this out here. When I make this sheath, maybe I'm going to cut the pattern for it. I'll cut the pattern a little bit longer here and have a tongue come up so that I can fold that over and make a belt loop here. Even though I'm not going to necessarily wear it on my belt, there is always a possibility that maybe I'll use it like that. It's nice to have the option. So that will be in there. You got to make that decision before you cut the leather. You can do it after, but it's kind of messy. The other thing is how are you going to attach this to the belt? You can make if you do this before you sew the thing together, it's way easier. So before I sew the whole thing together, I will want to put my loops on for attaching this belt. And really, as I'm talking to you on this, I'm still thinking about this, how I'm going to do this, right? So, as I mentioned before, I may want this thing to tip up a little bit. Actually, it's going to be around this way. I want it to tip up a bit, so maybe I'll just put most of the, maybe I'll put two belt loops on it so that this belt can go through there, maybe one here and one there. I want to give it a little bit of tippability, but not to be too floppy. Another thing that you got to take in consideration, if you ever made a sheath for a knife or anything like that, rivets. Okay, normally with a handgun holster, I'll just sew the thing right on through. But in the case of this, there is a good reason for having rivets on the edge of this sheath. And that is because you're going to be putting a sharp blade in there. and when you slide it in, you sure don't want to have that blade cutting through your threads that are sewing the sheath together. So by putting some some rivets through there, that will prevent that. Very important aspect of this design. So other than that, I think it's I've thought this thing through, and I've got myself a piece of leather that I'm going to draw a pattern on. I'm going to just use this as my pattern. Just roll it over and trace it like that, and I'm going to cut it out, and we're going to make this this sheath for a machete. So, something you're interested in? Ever want to do some leather work? This is a video for you. I'll try to make this as clear as possible, and I hope it works. So let's get to work here. Okay, let's begin with making our pattern for this sheath. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work along this side here first, and I'm also going to take a piece of leather, all as a continuous piece, out from here and bring that out, and I'm going to take another piece coming out to make the belt loop for it. That way this piece that wraps around is going to be an integral piece with the whole piece of leather. So let's see how this goes. I have a little Sharpie pen here that usually works pretty good. We'll see how this goes. And I think we got ourselves a fairly decent pattern here, if you can see that. I'm not sure. Let's just zoom in a little bit. If you can see. So now all we have to do is cut this thing out. So we'll get on to that next. So now we have the pattern made, and a couple of little notes here that I'm going to make is you'll notice that I've drawn my pattern on the rough side of the leather, because this is the side here that's going to be showing. So if you're going to make some marks and stuff on your leather, best to do it on the bottom side that's rough, that people don't see. Another thing that I'm going to note here is this is a very long shape here, and although I've rolled the sheath over to try to make a good even-sided figure, I'm not 100% confident in that, and I never am. That comes with making holsters and stuff too. So what's a good idea to do is to cut this one half off. That's what I'm going to do first, and I'm going to cut it up to here and there. Take this part, and then I'll fold it over, and I'm going to see how close this edge matches with that one, just in case one side wobbles in more than the other. That's a definite possibility. So I can definitely catch that before it becomes a problem. I can also get this to be a little bit more even at the point. So a lot of benefits to doing that way. But as we go through this, it's going to take a little while, so I probably won't film the whole thing. But see what I'm cutting on here is actually it's an old drafting board that you can buy. I don't know if I can lift this anymore. It's a special kind of material that we use for drafting that you can cut on, and I've had this drafting board for, boy, about almost 40 years, I guess, and I've been drawing on it and cutting on it the whole time. It's a self-healing type of material. I don't know if you can still get that or not, but that's an excellent surface for working on when you're cutting. And when I use a knife, when I use a nice sharp blade, I prefer to cut in several stages through, not one hard cut. I know there's some guys who do this for a living, and I've watched them. They just actually take the knife and they just pull the leather ahead, and just hold the knife in one place and do it in one cut, but I'm not that good. So I'll do the best I can here. I'm going to start with this end. Now, what I'm going to do here, at least my plan, is to take this, I should just cut this piece off here, right? Just make it easier to work with. Get rid of that. Maybe I'll take the pen in case I need it. Now let's see how this fits together. If it fits together good, then I won't worry about it, but I have a suspicion that it'll need a bit of a tweak. Okay, so that's, that's sitting not too bad. But it could be evened out a little bit. Maybe especially right around here. That was the hardest part to get balanced on both sides. So I'm going to shape this just a little bit. That should be pretty good. Yeah, something like that. Get a good match on this thing going. So that's like that. Like that. Like that. Maybe take a little bit off here. And that part is pretty good. That part, the rest of it is actually pretty good. Okay, so I think we're clear to go ahead and finish cutting this thing. We have success here. Yep. Beauty. Okay, so we don't need this piece now for a while. That then becomes the basis of our sheath. So I'm going to have this be the sheath. I'm going to have this be the loop for going around the back. And then this piece to wrap around with a... I'm going to use a snap on this thing. I thought about that for a while, different methods. But I think a snap is going to be the best. This part here, I'll just solder it right in. So, and then along here, I'll put a few rivets, and then stitch it on through. I would be remiss, I think, if I didn't show the actual machete fitting into this proposed sheath. So let's just take a look at that. How that would fit in there. Right, so we should be able to get a good fit on this blade like that, and then the whole thing working like so. So I think we'll call that success at this stage at least. Let's see if we can get this thing finished to a proper result. Okay, let's pick up where we left off, where we trimmed off the leather, and I now have the basis of the sheath finished to a certain point where I just skipped over, but I have these loops sewed onto the leather, because that's much easier to do while it's flat, right? So now I just have to put the sheath together, and I did the same thing with the belt loop, optional belt loop on the back. So let's take a look at how to put this sheath together. And as I was showing you before, I'm going to be using studs along the side, and that's the first thing I want to do, is to put some studs along the side of this. And when you're using studs, you have to have sort of an anvil. You can get these along with the studs that you buy, and you need a punch with a curved base on it. So I'll give you a little look at that too. It's maybe not real clear from here, but you get those along with the studs that you buy from a leather craft store or hobby store. And you have to get the right length of stud so that it goes through the leather. Here's a stud example here. You see I put that through. I just did a test, and this is always a good idea. Take the pieces of leather that you're going to rivet together, or if you're using buckles, things like that, do it on a scrap piece of leather and pound them together. Make sure everything works before you start doing it on the real thing. So I've done that. I found the right size of rivet, and I believe these are the mediums. In this case, I'm using medium size double tap rivets, they're called. And when I put them together, it was basically just a matter of setting the curved side of the anvil on a surface and putting the curved side of the drive on top and just pounding them together. Then the inside part of the rivet swells and it never comes apart again. So the first thing we got to do is we're going to mark the placement of the rivets along one side of this sheath, and I'll punch the holes through, and we'll try to match them up with the other side and get these rivets put in place, because once I have the rivets put in place, this thing is all going to hold together pretty good, and I can get on to the sewing phase without a great deal of difficulty. And it's quite a bit easier having rivets at the beginning if you put them in properly, because then you'll get a nice straight seam along here instead of it wavering around. So let's see how well we can do this. Okay, so as I mentioned before, or alluded to briefly, the purpose of this video isn't to just make a sheath for this machete, but it's to introduce you to some of the basic techniques involved doing leather work and making things like holsters and sheaths. So one of the things you should be mindful of is you have to use a punch that's the right diameter. So here I have a bunch of rivets. I'm going to take one as an example. And I have this rivet here. See how close that looks. It's quite small. Okay, I better get another one. And the idea is that I'm just opening up a small hole for these, so I don't want them to spill out all over. But I have a rivet like this, and I have a cap piece like one of these here. Okay, so maybe I'll just hold it on my hand and let you get an idea what we're dealing with here. So this part is a little bit bigger, the whole end on it, and the whole thing fits together. The whole thing fits together like that, and you're basically going to pound this rivet so that the inner part bulges and it holds together. It doesn't come apart. But what you want is, you don't want your hole to be so big that the shaft of this rivet is going to wobble around inside the hole. So don't use too big of a hole, use a proper size rivet. And this one is almost on the big side, but it's close enough. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make some marks where I want the rivets, and it's kind of handy this time that I'm working off a sheath that's already made, because then I can have my spacing of the rivets figured out. So I'm going to make a mark. Let's see, I think I'll do it about like this. I'm going to have the rivet be about here, and there, and there, and there. And this one will be pretty well right at the end. Okay, so we got our marks for the rivets. Where we want the centerpiece to be is about having that rivet almost to the edge. So I'm going to center it right about there. It's good to use the rivet itself for this measurement. And okay, this one, center line should be about there. Make it stick out a little bit. Okay, let's get another one here. Center line should be about here. And another one, let's have the center line be about here. Okay. And finally, this guy, have the center line be about here. And make that mark here. Okay. So now we've got our positions marked. I'm only doing it on this one side here because once I get these holes punched through, I'll just flip this over and I'm going to mark the other side according to that. In fact, I might just rivet this one in first and finish with it so that I don't have to worry about things shifting around. So first order of business is to get some holes punched through here. We'll do that next. Okay, let's get a hole punched through here and put this right here. Have yourself a piece of wood underneath the leather. This is not a real firm table to be pounding into, but so it's going to bounce around a little bit, but it'll get the job done, I think. There we go. Now you can see that hole has gone through and we got a hole for a rivet. And what I'm going to do next, I think, is I'm going to fit this. I'm going to fit this right against there. And I think I'll just drive that rivet right on through. I should have just marked it lightly without having to push the shaft through that much, but that's okay. Okay, so now we've got ourselves a hole here on either side. And let's take a rivet. Let's attach that. I've got the one half here. Let me get another one. Okay. And get the anvil, the other half of the rivet, and I have this concave ended punch here. So what I want to do is take this, put it through here. Okay, I'm going to have that. This part here, actually I should do it this half first. Yeah, it's a nice tight fit on this side. I like that. Actually, I might just expand this hole here a little bit so that this can fit in there better. It's not quite all the way through. There we go. let's get this piece in there, and let's put this piece here, get these guys together, there. Now we want to have the concave end of this anvil, or whatever, to sit on the bottom. Make sure you're using the concave end of this. Make sure everything is right, because once you do this, it doesn't come apart anymore. Make sure it's not moving. There. She's now riveted together. That's our first rivet. Maybe almost too close to the edge, but yeah, I think it should be okay. Even on both sides. Okay, so let's just work our way through then. Seated pretty good though. There we go. Okay, so now we have this thing nicely riveted together, and the next phase is going to be just a matter of I'm going to take some lines to cut the groove for the threading to go, channel to go through, and punch some holes through the leather, and then we'll just thread this, we'll sew this edge together. Once that's all done, then I can start working on putting a buckle on this end. I'll kind of shape up this tongue a little bit, and we'll be pretty much done with the sheath. So maybe I'll just grab the knife and just kind of see how that's fitting in there. We have the machete here, so unless I've made some really big mistake, that's gonna fit in there just like so, and close up like that. I think we're on the right track, boys. I think we're on the right track. Okay, I'll move on to the next phase now. Okay, the next step in this process, I have the edges riveted together. One thing I'll mention that in addition to the rivets I put in the last segment of the video, I added one more here, because once I was putting the blade in there, I thought that it might need a little more protection for the threads at this curvature part of the sheath, so I added one more in there. Now, next thing we have to do is have to sew this edge together, and I'm going to give you an idea of how to do that. We begin by cutting a groove for the thread to go into, and it's a good idea to have a groove. It looks nice for one thing, but it's also a good way of keeping the thread protected from rubbing and wear, because it'll make it sit underneath the surface of the leather. So what you want to use is if I can show that, is a tool like that. It's just this part of it rides along the edge of the leather, and this part here has a little cutting edge. So I'm going to cut a groove using this. Does a nice job. Let's see, we're going to get a good view of that. There, just need a couple of strokes of that to get that line in there. Now I could do it on the other side right away too, and but the way I'm going to do this, and there are a lot of different ways to skin the cat when it comes to this type of work, is I'm going to take this chisel and I'm going to put that through this leather to give myself good spacing, and so I can get the needles through when I do the sewing. So we'll move on to that next. Okay, let's get the holes punched so I can do the sewing, because this leather is quite thick. Now, one of the things I'm going to do here, and everybody has their own way of doing it, is I'm going to use one of these forks here to pound evenly spaced holes through the leather. Now, the downside of that is when you pound a fork like this through, it's pretty hard to get out. And I'm going to see how it goes here, but I may just put it partly through and then take a piercing needle and pierce the rest of the way through to the other side of the leather. Now, one of the tricks involved in this is that it's a bit difficult to get a perfect alignment straight up and down through, so that on the other side the holes come out exactly at the nice spacing, but I'll do the best I can. This is the side of the sheath that people are going to see most often, so I want this to be the neatest. And once I get the holes punched through, then I'll cut a groove on this side before I do the lacing. Okay, so let's just see how this goes. Let's start from here. And straight up and down. There we go. You can see there, it's not quite through. It's very thick leather, so those forks are right all the way in. Now, what I could do, pull this apart. I can take this piercing needle now, and I should be able to push it through. You can see that, eh? Take each of these holes and I'll push the needle through. There they go. So now I have, sorry for the blotchy lighting on this. It's early in the morning here, and I got the trees with the sun waving around, so we're seeing a lot of shade and shadow. But this gives you an idea of how that's come together there. So now I've got my holes cut through here, coming through the other side. I'll take this channel making device and we'll cut that on this side and see how that looks. It's pretty close to where it should be. There we go. So now we have that done through both sides. We're ready for doing some sewing. We'll get on to that next. Okay, the next phase of this project, I'm going to do the sewing of the seams. I'm going to just do this portion here for the video, and now that we have the holes punched, what I'm using here is a waxed flax type of thread. you have to cut off a piece like this, and say about, you know, you want to make sure you have enough, and it's surprising how much you need sometimes. So I'm going to I always err on the side of being too much, because running out of thread partway through is a real pain. So take this, I'll cut that off, and put my glasses on, and see if I can thread the needle, so to speak. Now, the kind of needles you want to use are good stiff ones. You're going to need 2 of them. And I'm going to just walk over and give you a kind of a close look at them. These are not sharp needles. They are dull points, because I've got the holes pierced through already, and then there's the end there. I'm going to use 2 of these needles, okay, and do basically, I think they call it a saddle stitch. You do it in a figure-8 pattern through the leather. Makes for a really strong, long-lasting stitch, and flax is very, very strong thread to resist wear and breakage. So I'm going to pull that guy through there. Definitely helps that I have my glasses on. And let's put this guy through. Flatten out that end good. And away we go. Now a lot of people will do fancy ways of tying off the end here so it doesn't slip out, but I find it's not all that hard to keep the thread in the needle when you're doing this type of work. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start sewing this. I'll zoom in a little bit for that. Okay, let's do some sewing here. This is the fun part, actually. I'm going to take this needle, I'm going to start from here, and I'll push it through. Try to get it to the halfway point. You know, I'm starting to wonder if I got enough thread to do this. I might have made it a little bit short, because you know, you need double the length. I'm almost thinking that I'm going to just back out of this right now. I'm going to say no good. Once I see that in there, I'm going to cut myself a little bit longer piece of thread. Okay, I now have myself a longer piece of thread. It's deceiving sometimes how much you need. So when I was going to start there, I thought it over a little bit and thought, yeah, let's just get plenty of thread in there, because it really is a pain if you run out of thread partway through. So having this needle through the first time, I'm just going to take 2, make sure that I'm equal in the amount of thread on either side, roughly, and I'll pull this through there, close enough. Get these guys separated, and we can begin. So this needle goes through this way, lay it over. You gotta kind of keep your threads from getting tangled with each other. And after every one I do, I always give it a good tight pull, sink it into the leather real good, and proceed. Make sure you got, oh, shoot. Yeah, no, shoot. That one went, being distracted by the camera, I actually went back through the same hole that I started with. So I'm going to have to take this guy out. It is actually fairly easy to get. You got to pay attention to the hole that you're putting the thread in. Okay, so this one here, it's got to go through here. So I'm leaving this slight little boo-boo into the video because it just shows that it's easy to make a mistake doing this stuff. Okay, now I have my first stitch made, and I can proceed carefully, paying attention to what I'm doing. And we'll get this thing sewed up in pretty short order. We've now reached the end of the stitching, and you can see that we have a seam sewed right up there, and on the other side through that way as well. And I had just enough thread to make this comfortably long enough to work with. And now that we're at the end, I'm just going to show one final piece of this sewing process that you should be aware of, and that is how to finish off the thread. So I have this, I've gone right to the end here, and I'm going to back stitch a little bit. Now when you're back stitching, it's a little tougher, and what you can do, this one isn't too bad, but what I'll quite often do is I'll take a pair of pliers and I'll push the needle through and then pull it out the other end if the hole is really tight. Now I don't know if it's going to get really tight on this one, but if it does, that's what I'm going to do, in fact, because your fingers will get really sore after a while trying to pull on this needle. Just give it a pull through. Generally, the number of stitches to back stitch, generally I would say 5 or 6, depending on how much tension is going to be on that seam. In the case of this piece, since I've got rivets closing off either end, it's not going to be a lot of tension to pull, attempting to pull this seam apart. So I could easily go with, let's say, 4 or 5 back stitches. Okay, we're now down to the end of the back stitching. You can see here that I've gone right to the end, and then I back stitched, in this case 5 stitches. So what we'll do is trim this off just to show you that you make a nice, make sure when you're cutting, that you're cutting slightly away from the leather. And then you'll have a nice, neat finishing off to the thread. Okay, there we go. So we wind up with a nicely sewed edge. Where can I show that to you? And looks good, I think. I'm not a professional, but I try to do the best I can, and we aim to please around here. So that is sort of the method of stitching, using a saddle stitch to get the sheath together. And I'm going to continue this along through the whole edge to finish that up, and then I'll show you a few little tips on finishing the edge and putting the buckles on. Hopefully we can get that in this video as well without it running too long. And once that's done, we're going to have a completed sheath, and a very strong one at that. So let's move on to the next phase. We're now going to skip ahead a little bit to the final phase of this project. This video has taken quite a while to do, and I've tried to cover it thoroughly, but I don't want to overdo it either. I don't want to repeat processes that I think have been explained fairly well in the video up to this point. But what I would like to show you is how I finished off this sheath, and also give you an idea of what I did with this sling here. So let's take a couple of close-up looks at this, and we'll dig into this a bit. Okay, first of all, let's take a look at what is basically the finished machete sheath here. What I've done is I finished sewing up all along the sides, right to the tip there, and there's not much else to say about it. I just continued doing my sewing, but when I was finished, then I also burnished the edges. And by burnishing the edges, what I mean is, some of you may be familiar with this, but you can use a tool sort of like this, and you can scrape along the round off the edges of the leather, and then you can apply some moisture to the edge of the leather, and you take a tool like this, a burnishing tool, choose the proper width slit on it, and while it's wet you just work it back and forth, and it produces a nice sealed and shiny finished looking edge on your sheath. So just want to make sure you cover that part of it, because it does add a nice finished touch to your project. So that pretty much does it for the machete. The other thing I didn't show in this was the addition of a buckle. It's done very similar to doing the rivets as we showed before, so I won't cover that again. The only thing I'll caution you about is when you're putting these snaps together, they're in 4 parts. There's 2 parts for this side, 2 parts for that. Have the open end, the female end side on the bottom side, and make sure, and then you basically just rivet it together with its base. I would recommend doing this on a test piece of leather first, for both pieces, and making sure that you know what you're doing if you've never done it before. And even if you have done it before, it's still a good idea to do a test with whatever hardware you're using. So then I take these 2 pieces for the top snap. The bottom snap is a little different looking. I don't know if I can show it to you very well there, but so it has a base sort of like that, right? Can you see that? Hopefully so. That just rivets together. So same thing on both sides. Once you got her done, and this sheath should go together nicely, and the snap attaches without any problem at all. So that should be easy to use in the field. Now let's move on to the next thing here. Next thing is this bandolier type harness or strap or belt or whatever you want to call it. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I thought it would be best to join these 2 pieces so that they come together at an angle. That way it'll hang around your body in a much more uniform fashion without sort of bulging out and stuff like that. So then basically the 2 parts just come together like that, and you zip it together, and you have a strap like that. Now the way this is going to work is we're going to have these parts here go through, and I made the hoops fairly tight so that they'll be so that the sheath won't slide up and down as you're walking. And then put it together like so. Let's see if I can. This is all still fresh. It hasn't been bent, folded into shape yet. That's how it sort of comes together here, and it'll basically go over the body like this. You can add some more holes on here as you go along. The other thing I'll show you is this part here that I decided to add on. Now if I didn't have my vest on, it would show a little bit better, but this loop, I can have that go through my belt, and that way it holds the entire assembly a lot more stable. So to give you an idea of how that would fit, when you have that belt loop, your belt going through this loop here, that just keeps everything a lot more stable. Then you can walk through the bush, have this thing sitting there if you need to use it, wield it, take it out, do your hacking, put it back in, buckle it, and you're good to go. So that is the sheath and the bandolier belt for this rig. I hope you enjoyed this video. It hasn't taken too much time to make this, and as I said at the outset, if you haven't got into leatherworking, by all means get into it. The tools that you need to buy are pretty inexpensive, and that way you can make anything you want for the rest of your life. I will also note that for some of the techniques on here, I have a few other leather making videos on the channel, and I'm going to put links to those at the end of this video and also in the description, so that if you want to learn more about some of these techniques like burnishing and a little bit more on putting buckles and snaps together, stuff like that, that'll show you in a lot more detail, but I covered as much of it as I could in this video. So I hope you found this video useful, and if you enjoyed it, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Click subscribe, click like, tell your friends about the Way to Native Chronicles, because all the support you give us really makes a huge difference in terms of continuing to produce content for you. As I always say, we strive to come up with content that I think will be of most use in practical sense to our viewers, and if you have some suggestions on what you'd like to see a little different, by all means leave a comment in the comment sections, comment on this video, ask questions. We're very open to that. So, well, as I always say, until next time, God bless.